I'm Dr. Denise Gastaldo, and I'll be talking to you about epistemological congruence and rigor in qualitative health research today. In this talk, I will use as synonyms epistemological and theoretical coherence and congruence. Most of us conducting qualitative research want to make a splash. So where do you start? First, you should think that quality is at the core of qualitative research. A solid qualitative research requires high-quality data and skillful analytical strategies for the researcher to create a sophisticated account of a particular phenomenon. That's how we contribute. So a splash in this case means valuable contribution, trustworthy results, and a rigorous methodological process. But how do you achieve that? I suggest you start situating yourself within the tradition of qualitative research. So first you have to understand that we have 120 years of history. And Ravenek and La Liberté Rudman show that there are 4 key moments in the way we think criteria for qualitative research over this period. So explore those and consider where you situate yourself and understand the tradition you are coming from. Second, your topic of study should be social in nature. Qualitative research is used to study social phenomena in health and illness. It includes cultural norms, power relations, it includes human interactions and the creation of meaning. So if you want to use qualitative research, make sure you are looking at those. And third, you need a social theory to guide your study. Another important consideration for a qualitative researcher who wants to achieve congruence is to think, what is theory? How do you conceive theory? So I'm going to put forward some ideas for you. Theory is a lens, a way of seeing that orients you towards a particular worldview or a particular way of thinking about your research. A theory is also a system of ideas intended to explain a phenomenon, where the understanding of the key elements can be extrapolated to other contexts. In summary, theory is an explanatory framework. Also in theory, it's important that you consider how several concepts are articulated within a same theory, and they help you to explain a particular society, a particular group of people. So it is about concepts and explanations getting together. We all come from some theoretical perspective, don't be naive. Either implicitly or explicitly, you are using theory when you conduct research. So you have to be mindful of how you think about social relations, interactions, power dynamics, because there is where your theory is. More formally, there is a hierarchy that I would say we can characterize theory in 3 domains. The first is the theory about theories or paradigms. I'll read for you what Thomas Kuhn has said about paradigms. He has said something like, paradigms are shared understanding among scientists about the nature of the legitimate problems, theories, and methods of their disciplines. So several theories can be grouped together under a paradigm, and researchers studying that area share some understanding about what is a legitimate problem and how to address that problem with a research design that is solid. The second level is what I already mentioned, theories themselves or theoretical frameworks. I use them as synonyms. In qualitative research, a theory proposes a particular way of understanding either a group, a society, some social relations. For instance, feminism is an example of a social theory. And there is a lower level, a level closer to data, closer to the empirical, that is called by several names. It's sometimes called middle range theory, other times it's considered a theoretical framework, other times people call it as models. So all those are conceptualizations, are theorizations that stay closer to the empirical data. In the health science, I'll give you some examples. Think of the concepts of stigma, social determinants of health, self-care, bereavement. All those are frameworks, conceptual frameworks. They are key concepts that have structured the way we think about issues in healthcare. Another consideration for you to have in mind is that all theories represent concomitantly a possibility, but also a limitation. There is no study of everything. This ambition, is not feasible. All research endeavor is a limited practice, and you should be thinking, what is the core of my study? Which are my key concepts? What am I advancing here? And that's where theory helps you. By adopting a theory or a concept to guide your study, you would belong to epistemological family. So be careful and remember to know who are your epistemological relatives, who else has produced knowledge in that area, because you are going to be contributing to that epistemological family. So you have to know other authors using the same theories and concepts who advanced knowledge. But what does a theory do? So a theory, as I said, acts as a lens, helps you to see and to think things in your study. For instance, if I look at a kaleidoscope, inside the kaleidoscope I have identical parts, little pieces of glass or plastic that, through reflection, create geometrical shapes. So I'm going to show you now 3 pictures from a kaleidoscope. What these pictures have in common is that they came from the same kaleidoscope with the same parts, even though they are different. So now let's apply that idea to research. Imagine you have interviewed caregivers, and now you want to apply a lens to understand what they are saying about caregiving. If you apply a feminist lens, what will you see? You'll see caregiving as a gender-based work, caregiving as a labor of love, sometimes, many times, caregiving done by women as unpaid work. Now, if you apply a different lens, a phenomenological lens, what you'll be seeing the meanings that caregivers construct and how they explain and experience caregiving, the meanings they attribute to that everyday activity. Finally, you could apply, my third example is a different theoretical perspective, such as post-colonialism. If you bring a post-colonial lens in this reading of caregivers' interviews, you will see otherness, you may see migrant care workers coming to Canada to deliver care here, you may see racialization. So basic theories are ways of seeing that create with, same core data, nuances, difference, elements that are highlighted. That's what they help you to do. How do you articulate theory with rigor, you must be asking yourself? Well, I propose 2 ways. You embrace the key features of qualitative research, and you establish an epistemological congruent study from the beginning. So let's talk about the first. I'm going to mention 4 key features of qualitative research. There are others, but here are some for you to consider. Qualitative research generates contextualized knowledge. So a good qualitative study provides a very good description of the context that shaped those practices and ways of doing that you are describing, your sophisticated account of the phenomenon. So qualitative research is also called naturalistic inquiry, precisely because it happens in a natural setting. Another feature is that the researcher is a key instrument for data generation. So to generate and analyze data, you need the researcher subjectivity, you need the researcher positionality to be considered. So the researcher is shaping the study, and this is something good because she or he or they are considering their interactions with the field, with the participants, and how this process is shaping knowledge production. A third feature is qualitative research is emergent design. In qualitative research, you can refine your research question after you started the study. You can go back to the ethics review board and you can refine your recruitment strategy. But all that should be considered and described for your readers. You have to have a very good description of all your methodological decisions throughout the study. You are doing the best with your qualitative research, so you are trying to achieve a fourth element, that is capturing participants' emic perspective. So participants' perspective are called emic perspectives, and what they do, they address the subjective dimensions of human experience. So you want to learn in depth how these people experience that phenomenon and then theorize it so that it can be applied to other groups. Once you have achieved like a good depth of understanding of the key features of qualitative research, then you are going to establish your study, and I would say you have to start with notions of congruence. I'm going to read for you what Bev Taylor has said about congruency. She says, "Congruency means linking and connecting ideas so that there is a discernible flow and fit between ideas arising from the entire research inquiry, from the questions, aims, objectives, right through the data collection and analysis, methods and processes, and the eventual research insights and implications that show the application and progression of ideas, faithful to the foundational ideas of a respective methodology." And I would add, faithful to the respective ideas of qualitative research itself, of course. So I suggest you can achieve that in 2 steps. In the health science, it's very important to adopt these 2 steps. That is, you do it and you show it to others you have done, okay? So step 1, I'm going to mention, this is not a comprehensive list, but I'm going to mention some of the things you should consider doing when you are trying to achieve epistemological congruence. So make your theoretical or conceptual approach explicit from the beginning of the study. Situate it within a research paradigm, what I have called your epistemological family. Understand the key tenets of your theory. So you have to be clear about what are your own epistemological assumptions when you are starting a study. Use these tenets to guide your methodological decisions throughout the study. Consider how your methods and theories speak to each other. How do they relate? And then you think about the role of the researcher according to these theoretical and methodological perspectives. And finally, you theorize your results to make them transferable to other contexts. So all that is the doing of epistemological congruence. Once you have achieved that, you move into the showing it. So, as I said, this is particularly important in the health science, where people are very keen on understanding how rigor has been developed throughout the study. So you explain the methodological dimensions you explain the methodological decisions that you made throughout the study. All key moments in the methodology that shape the study the way it is. You describe how theoretical perspectives shape the story of the study or the methodology. Those 2 are very close. You illustrate how you use theory to problematize some taken for granted assumptions in your field of study. So how did you use theory to think innovatively, challenge assumptions? You explain the role of theory in data analysis, that's another element. And finally, you acknowledge your own theoretical contribution to the area of study. It's important for you to claim your originality, your contribution at the end of your study. I'm going to give you one example to make this less abstract now. I'm going to mention my study that used post-colonial theory to study migrant workers in Canada. So this is a study conducted with Magalhães and Carrasco, and we use I'm just mentioning 3 general ideas about post-colonial theory here to orient you. So we contextualize the phenomenon as a feature of global capitalism and an effect of neoliberal economic practices, rather than say people who migrate should be criminalized as individuals. We move to the social economic sphere and explain how, theoretically, we explain how this phenomenon is happening and why it is happening today. Then we focus on the transnational and local processes that take place here that reproduce the phenomenon of international migration. But we also focus on the health consequences that were not very well understood in the field. So there are multiple push and pull factors, and by doing that, reveal the complexity and the ambivalences in these movements of people around the globe. We also explicitly acknowledge health as a human right, and you'd say, oh, well, everybody thinks that. What we have done is to problematize access to health care as a right of citizens. In Canada, you don't have access to health care unless you are a citizen with an insurance from the province. So we problematized that this is not the equivalent of health as a human right. So which are the implications, the methodological and theoretical implications of thinking in this way in my study? First, obviously, we named the participants undocumented workers. We didn't call them illegal immigrants, obviously not. We considered the impact of the position of the researchers. So we were women with Canadian citizenship, but also immigrants and also people sharing cultural backgrounds with our participants. So how did that all interfere and gave us strengths to interact with our participants, to think the data? All that was considered. We created opportunity for participants to express ideas never narrated before. Many of my participants, or our participants, sorry, they were very afraid of deportation. They never told people back home how difficult the situation was in Canada. So we had to not only interview them, but we added methods. We used creative, arts-based methods and multiple interviews to help them to have the chance to elaborate on their experience. Another thing we have done is that we describe the social and health consequences as unnecessary suffering. So, because we believe that this exchange of capital and people around the globe has to be rethought, and the nations can relate differently, treating people around the globe better, we said the experience of these participants is unnecessary suffering. We're challenging the way things are done currently. And then we analyze their subjectivities in Canada as simultaneously people who are seen by their families as heroes, but seen in Canada as criminals. So these multiple subjectivities coexisting and how they were trapped in patterns of consumptions here and back home, and how that entangled them in this current globalization system. So these are just a few highlights of my study to show potential uses of theory to think methodology. So, in summary, epistemological congruence requires an in-depth knowledge of a particular theory. It requires a clear theory methodology link, connections well established and described. And it also requires a consistent utilization of theory throughout your study. If you're looking like the guy on the left first and now you're looking like the guy on the right, don't worry. Sometimes people feel impacted by the use of theory. Just think like Kurt Lewin, who said, there is nothing as practical as a good theory. As food for thought, I would like to leave you with 3 ideas. First, ask yourself, which social theories have you studied to date? You know several concepts, you know several theories already. Start where you have depth, where you have knowledge. And then ask yourself, how does the topic of your interest, the topic of your study, relate to particular concepts and theoretical perspectives? Then you can go and explore other theories, other concepts. And as an exercise, I suggest you read Eichen and colleagues and consider how a critical social perspective has influenced their thinking about tobacco. But rather than thinking about smoking, think about your own topic and try to see how a different theory could shape your thinking about a phenomenon differently. I think this is a nice exercise. And finally, here are some readings that you could do now that you have this introduction to epistemological congruence, and consider more elements for reaching rigor in qualitative health research. I hope these tips were helpful for you, and I hope you have success in your future endeavors in qualitative research. Good luck.